On September 18, Canada's leader Justin Trudeau pointed fingers at India, saying that they were involved in the murder of a Canadian Sikh separatist named Hardeep Singh Nijjar. This is a big deal because Sikhs are a small part of India's population, but they're really important in the state of Punjab. For a long time, there has been struggle for Sikh homeland called the Khalistan movement. Sometimes things get violent and India don't hold back in its response. But killing someone on foreign soil? That's a major setup in the fight against Sikh separatists. India's Ministry of External Affairs said that they had nothing to do with the murder and also criticized Canada's stance on terrorism. They basically said that Canada is too hands-off about it and that it could hurt India's sovereignty. Trudeau's accusations come at a time when India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is trying to show the world that India is a big player on the global stage. He's been saying that this is the time people are seeing India stand up for itself. So in this episode, we're going to dive into the complicated relationship between Canada and India and see why these two major countries are clashing. I'm Mugdha Goyal and you're listening to the News Park. So to understand the situation, let's first discuss how is there such a large Sikh community in a country like Canada. Sikhs began migrating in substantial numbers overseas during the late 19th century. This movement was closely tied to the expansion of the British Empire, where Sikhs initially played a crucial role in the armed services and also among police force. Consequently, whenever the British Empire extended its reach, especially in places like China, Singapore, Fiji, Malaysia, the Sikhs followed. Their migration to North America, particularly the Pacific coast, gained momentum following Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee in 1887. And citizens of the British Empire technically had the right to travel and settle anywhere they wanted to. Since that time, there has been notable Sikh communities in various parts of the world, including British Columbia, California, and Britain itself. Sikhs have been a permanent and significant presence in Britain since the 1920s, with even more arriving since the conclusion of the Second World War. Now, let's talk about the Sikh population within India. At the same time when Sikhs started migrating to different parts of the world, there is a huge Sikh community in the Indian state of Punjab, which was one of the two states split in half during the partition. There is a movement there for some of the independent Sikh homeland, but let's see how this movement started and what was its role in the Indian politics during the partition. So, during the partition of India, the Sikh community found itself in a vulnerable position. Sikhs made various attempts to keep their community and Punjab intact. Unfortunately, these efforts were in vain, as the British were eager to depart from India and Punjab swiftly. So, following the partition, Indian states or provinces were recognized along linguistic lines. Sikh leaders believed that advocating for a Punjabi-speaking state would help protect their community's rights and freedoms. However, the demand created bitterness and resentment among the Punjabi-speaking Hindu community, who chose Hindi as a means of opposing the demand. They were concerned that Punjabi over Hindi would be detrimental to their interests. So after nearly 2 decades of campaigning, this demand was reluctantly granted in 1966. Another campaign between 1973 and 1984 sought greater economic and political autonomy for Punjab. This period culminated in a traumatic event when the Indian Army entered the Golden Temple during the Operation Blue Star in 1984. This action was followed by a decade of unrest and troubles in the region. Moving on, let's look at how, after the assassination of the Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, also in 1984, and how the push for Sikh autonomy became in some cases more violent. Between 1980 and 1982, there was an extended period of negotiations between moderate Sikh leaders and Indira Gandhi along the Congress party in Delhi. Unfortunately, these talks failed to reach an agreement on the demands put forth. Over time, the more militant faction within the Sikh leadership gained prominence, causing a growing divide between the Indian government and the militants. This polarization reached its peak with Operation Blue Star. It was an operation aimed at removing Sikh militants from the Golden Temple, the holiest site in Sikhism. Tragically, it was followed by the assassination of the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi in October 1984 and a brutal backlash that resulted in the deaths of nearly 3,000 Sikhs in Delhi. These events marked the beginning of almost a decade of Sikh militancy and counter-operations carried out by the Indian Armed Forces. Conservative estimates suggest that operations claimed 30,000 lives. The repercussions of these events have cast a long shadow over the Punjab issue, which continues to be a significant outcome for successive governments in Delhi even today. So when did the Indian government begin to get so concerned about Sikhs on foreign soil, advocating for Sikh issues in India? The Indian government has maintained a consistent monitoring of the activities of overseas Indians over the years. The first notable instance of such monitoring began in the early 70s when attention was specifically directed towards Sikh militants. This heightened scrutiny was triggered by the actions of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a Sikh political leader who left India and is often referred to as a key figure in the Khalistan movement. Nijjar initiated a campaign advocating for a Sikh state. However, the monitoring efforts intensified during the early 80s. During this period, the Indian government and Congress party in particular placed a significant focus on closely monitoring the activities of Sikh militants. How important is the push for a Sikh homeland to Sikh identity in many of the Western Sikh communities? Let's find out. The concept of Sikh homeland didn't get much traction for most of the post-1947 period. However, the events of 1984 triggered a significant backlash against the Indian government, empowering the militant groups to gain prominence. And when military in Punjab eventually subsided, the influence of these groups within Sikh organization also waned. Therefore, since the early 2000s and for most of the last few decades, the issue of a Sikh homeland hasn't been at the forefront for the majority of the Sikh diaspora. Instead, their focus has primarily been on the issues with their host countries, particularly after the 9/11 attacks, which led to the unfortunate targeting of many Sikhs in America who were often misidentified with the militant Islam. In recent years, a noteworthy development has been the large immigration of young people from Punjab due to economic challenges in the state and impact of protests by Indian farmers. Between 2020 and 2021, Punjab was a focal point of the farmers' agitation against the government of Narendra Modi and the BJP, which aimed to deregulate the farming sector. This protest movement triggered mobilization within the diaspora, rekindling some of the old networks associated with military and homeland politics. Do the Indian government have any legitimate case that there is a Sikh militancy in Canada and that there are connections between the militancy and things going on in India? Well, the Indian government claims that they sent Canada an extradition request for Nijjar and have done so for others, and that they were ignored. Well, is the Indian government right to be frustrated by this? Here's the deal. India wants people back from other countries, but it's not always easy. You see, in Western countries, there are rules and standards that need to be met for extradition requests, and India always doesn't meet them. It's not just about Sikhs and the militant stuff. It's also about rich people who ran away with lots of money and loans they owe. They don't want to go back to India because they're worried about the legal problems there. And when it comes to asking Canada to send their citizens back, India has to prove its case. And that can be done. Sure, in some cases, India's requests are legit, and these folks should face the music. But there's a big worry that Indian authorities might be too tough on Sikh young people and use unfair legal and government actions, especially under the Indian government, who doesn't always treat its critics nicely. It's like a big puzzle, and not all the pieces fit right. So let's find out if there is a concern among Indian origin communities in the West about surveillance being done in Western countries by the Indian government. So, back in the 1980s, people were really worried that some communities and groups were being watched closely. They were afraid that if they went back to India for family and stuff, bad things might happen to them. Nowadays, in places like Canada and parts of UK, Sikhs still feel scared and worried that they are being watched. This episode is all about showing how some Western countries are trying to become better friends with India. But sometimes, in the pursuit of stronger ties for trade and defense, they might forget about making sure that its people are safe, especially Sikhs, who could be at risk. It's like trying to make friends with someone but accidentally putting your own friends in danger. Certain Indian media sources have blamed Nijjar for the murder of a man in India that took place in 2021. The lives of militants often have histories marked by radicalism and involvement in violence. It's possible that he was a part of such activities, but it's equally possible that the case against him is fabricated. Therefore, it's challenging for anyone to make a definite comment on this matter with confidence. Is Modi government more concerned about movements that threaten India's political future, such as farmers' protests, than it should about separatism? We have to find that out. So this year in Punjab, there was a big commotion. It all started when a separatist preacher named Hardeep Singh was on the run. They eventually caught him and his followers, and that caused a lockdown for almost 2 weeks. After that, things got stirred up among groups of people who live outside Punjab, like in the US, Canada, and UK. They had angry protests outside Indian offices there, and these protests got a lot of attention in India. So it seems like because of all this trouble, the government decided to get tougher on those who want to break away from India. The situation right now might be a result of the decisions made back then. It's like when you make a decision and it leads to more problems down the road. If the allegation that India was involved in the assassination in Canada is true, then how is it different from the previous Indian policies regarding Sikh separatism? Thousands of people were killed in the 80s. So in one sense, this seems like we're going back in the earlier time. But anything that concerns or occurs on foreign soil goes beyond that. Similar incidents have occurred in the past, such as downing of Air India Flight 182 off the coast of Ireland in 1985. This tragic event resulted in a significant and prolonged dispute between India and Canada, causing a shadow over the relations between these two countries. This is when Canada's Sikh separatists were suspected of blowing up a passenger airplane, killing more than 300 people. These recent events might not be as famous as some things that happened in the past, but they're happening at a very important time. India is trying really hard to show the world it's a big deal. They're making deals and talking to other countries about things like weapons. So if these new problems turn into a big deal about how India treats people, or if they get blamed for messing with other countries, it could make it tough for India to keep its good reputation and make deals with other nations. It's like trying to climb a big ladder, but if you slip, you might slide down a few steps. The rising tensions between India and Canada are indeed causing concerns, especially for the people who have connections in both these countries. The recent serious allegations from Canada, coupled with India's suspension of the visa facility, are further escalating the situation. I hope this video was informative for you, and if you found this video helpful in understanding this issue, please consider liking and subscribing for more content related to the current affairs. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next time.